is what we need upon us. Let them come together with the unity among us. Unity, it's a unity. Yana, this a good work, you know what I'm saying?
Umoja ni nguvu, utengano udhaifu, tukisimama.
I'm excited to talk African cinema. I guess we should probably start with everybody maybe introducing themselves and what they do. Do you want to?
Hello, I'm Coriandu. I'm from Angola. Actually started my career as an advertising creative director, but I've evolved into content production, mainly television. In the film realm, I guess I'm more known for documentary film work, although I have done some feature work. And I think outside of the Portuguese-speaking African realm, I'm more known for producing series and telenovelas, and as well as model management.
Hi, my name is Karisho Bapela. I'm a deal maker with the Industrial Development Corporation. We provide financing for film production, feature films, documentaries, series, etc. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nudu Dang. I am South Sudanese, born in Khartoum, Sudan, based in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan. I have just an emerging film producer and a veteran events producer.
Hi, my name is Jim Shamun. I'm a service producer from Kenya and been doing this for 35 years.
Cool. I just want to, before we start, I want to, can you guys hear me without the microphone? Are we good without the microphone? Oh, okay. Oh, it's record. Okay, cool. I probably, like, just as an informal poll, can you, it's like, who have we got here? Like, you guys producers or like actors? Can you like say what you kind of do or like what, just informally shout them at me. Finance. Nice. Actor.
Documentary filmmaker, storyteller.
Cool. Yeah, I know. I think it's always good to get an understanding of who we're talking to, so we can provide you with things that might be worth your time. So I guess we're talking about African cinema. Can we start by? Can someone define what is African film? How do we define African film? Does anyone want to take the plunge?
I'll start. You have a second man in push.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you go.
My view on African film, the brand, is basically about indigenous stories. Mm-hmm. And I think over time we've been struggling to really define it at its core because we're trying to match Hollywood. But the recent developments in the market have shown us that there is appetite for indigenous stories, i.e., stories that have a global appeal but they're authentically African. Mm-hmm. I.e., we're not trying to mimic another industry or culture or anything like that, but it's about our people watching themselves on the screen and enjoying the stories because they can relate to them. Mm-hmm. And the changes in the industry now have made the stories to be universally accessible. And it gives us a chance not to actually keep the authenticity of our stories without worrying about being able to access the audience that we're worried about.
Well, I think it's always very interesting when people ask about Africa, quote unquote, anything, because we're a huge continent, we're widely diverse. And one thing, as someone I was born in Angola, if you can tell by my accent, I was raised in the United States. And one thing that I've noticed is, unfortunately, for a long time, Africans, we did not know our neighbors within the continent and even within the diaspora, and that is something that is changing. And one really interesting thing, and I think that is really informing African cinema or any kind of audiovisual content, is this new dialogue amongst Africans about what we enjoy, what we would like to say, what kind of stories people within the African continent and the African diaspora respond to. And I think that's creating a very interesting conversation. Other than, yes, authenticity is very important, but we must also realize that diversity is as important. And by diversity is Every African country is widely diverse within itself, and the whole continent is very diverse. So there's a multitude of stories and infinite possibilities that I don't think have yet been explored, and I think that's where we are, or that's why we are here today, and I think that's why there's been such a big interest, both internally and externally, about African film.
And yeah, so also too, mainly growing up in the United States, a lot of times people think Africa is one country. You know, being from now what is formerly Sudan, which was the largest country in Africa, you know, my tribe is just one of the majorities, but there are so many different diverse tribes within those borders that were created originally from Europe. So even though there's like, you know, you can meet a Sudanese or South Sudanese, there's a lot of common things, but then within the subcultures and different ethnic groups, and I think that's now being explored. So long, I think the US has focused on China and making sure everything was censored to cater to be able to get that audience. And now I think people are now discovering like the youngest youth in the world is Africa, and China has already been there, and there's now kind of this race even within the United States to try to come and capture that audience, which is given an opportunity for all of us Africans to also, you know, as having Nollywood, the biggest output of audiovisual in the world, to start showing all the other stories from the continent. So there's a real opportunity in showcasing what Africa is.
It's a very difficult thing for us because we are trying so hard to be identified as a continent. You know, Kenya alone has 42 different tribes. Yeah. But when it comes to what is an African film and what is not, right now we are being defined by outsiders. The reason for this is because we have a saying in Kenya, in Swahili, it says, "Mwenye mchele ndio ajua vile inapikwa." Right? In English, it is the person who owns the rice, he knows how it's going to be cooked. If you don't like how he cooked his rice, next time you bring your own rice. Yeah. So this is what we are seeing worldwide. We have, you know, like if you go to Europe, minimum wage in most of the developed world is about 10 euros or $10 or 10 pounds per hour. Yeah. So you work like a whole day. You walk, you know, you can walk away with $100 worth of money. You know, many people in my country live on $100 a month. So when countries, you know, in the West, who basically, you know, get everything from Africa. I go to Europe a lot, and if you go to a European supermarket, you find certain things that although they are earning 20 times more money than we are earning, eggs are cheaper, chicken is cheaper, butter is cheaper, cheese is cheaper. Here's the killer. Kenyan coffee is cheaper in Europe than it is in Kenya. So a country with that much affluence, they can afford to put aside 20, 30, 50, 100, $200 million to support their film industry. In most countries in the West, the film industry is part of their Ministry of Culture. Especially in France, it's very strong. It is soft power to, you know, exert French influence around the world by supporting films, supporting theater, supporting creative industries. But in Africa, I mean, just to get like $2 million from the government to support a whole industry, you know, it needs like a budgetary adjustment. So until we have the finances to actually redesign our own stories, it's going to be very, very difficult for us, you know, to have truly African films.
Just because what you were saying right there just sparked something in my mind, and what you've all said really, because I guess the one parallel to African cinema which has been really successful in recent years is African music. You know, Afro beats has been extremely successful, and I guess just as a kind of provocative question, why has the African music industries, and I'd say probably particularly in Nigeria, and artists have been so successful, but like you say, filmmakers, it's difficult for them to get the money. I know obviously it's much easier it costs much less to make music than it does to make films, but there's marketing or whatever, or distribution of music, that's still expensive. So what's the disparity there? Can you tell us?
So
and what can we learn from it?
So I used to work in dance music like years ago, and I feel like music industry is you get it put out with radios, there's a whole promotion machine behind it to kind of be like, this is what you're going to like. Whereas I feel like in films, it's not so much as controlled as that. And you're right about pop culture, because I've lived in the United States pretty much since 1980, and people maybe in the last 10 years know where Sudan and South Sudan is because of basketball players, because of models, because of people breaking into the film industry. But if that makes any sense.
Well, in terms of that question about music, it's very interesting that you bring that, because let's be real. In terms of the international mainstream, what is popular is not African music, it's Nigerian music. And I think we also have to start adding nuance to this conversation. I think it's very positive that specifically Nigerian music or South African music, with Black Coffee now producing soundtracks for movies and the major artists, those are opening a door. However, the gatekeepers have chosen their chosen players. And it's not Africa. It's places that are convenient for them based upon two key things. One is market size, and the other one is capital. How easy is it for a American company, for example, to transition into those markets and to easily and quickly make money in those markets with that content? Even the term Afro beats, attributed to pop music, was not created by Africans. It is how someone, I don't know, in the UK or somewhere in London or New York, decided to classify most African music that is not considered world music, which is not folkloric. So anything non-folkloric is Afrobeat and Afro beats, kind of, but it's born from Afrobeat. For me, Afrobeat comes from, Fela Kuti and Femi Kuti. But most people don't even have the understanding of that, because some label exec said, great, we don't know what it is, but this is what it is. And they put a label, created a formula around it, just like they have done with reggaeton or with K-pop. And they've tried to now create a movement behind it, but still, if you notice, even those emerging artists who do cross over into the mainstream, they too tend to come from the same places, and most of those places do have English as a vehicular language. In other fields, I think, maybe in modeling or in sports or even in acting, I think we have a bigger variety of talent crossing over, and that I can say as well because of my involvement in the modeling industry. But when it comes to, I would say, music and now film, or audiovisual content, you can see the trend is the same. Because if we talk about, for example, I was part of a panel at the Durban Film Mart where Netflix execs straight out said that if you are not from 3 specific African markets, and if you are from a French-speaking or Portuguese-speaking market, you are not a priority as a filmmaker. So content and content makers from those places were not considered, as of 2021, a priority for that and other streaming platforms who may not say it out loud, but I was actually happy that they had the courtesy to say it out loud in the form of other players, so that we don't spend our time trying to cater to those and we can maybe approach other platforms who are making us a priority.
I was actually the chair of the Oscar submission committee for Kenya from 2009 to 2012. And the rules at that time were actually very, very strict. If you wanted to submit a film for the Oscars in the foreign language category, then 8 of the top 11 positions, which were like producer, director, DOP, production design, script writer, whatever, 8 of those positions had to be from that country, and the language had to be from that country. And what's happened is actually a step backwards, because the Academy has changed the rules since then, and now all they want is, a foreign language.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah, everything that everybody said was really interesting. One thing that stuck out for me, as that you were just saying about the execs, is I kind of, as part of my job, I go around and I go to these festivals all of the time, and I hear these execs talk. And the one thing that they say to me is that, there's such a, a growing middle class in Africa and in the Middle East. We really want to tap into that. So I guess that that's kind of in contrast to what you were saying. But I guess generally, is it a good thing that these companies believe that there's a growing middle class in Africa that they can tap into to get a bigger subscriber base? Because I guess they want to make indigenous work, whatever we describe that as, because they want to get subscribers. So is that a good thing? Is that something that filmmakers should be welcoming?
I think it could be a double-edged sword, right? From a commercial viability point of view and the evolution of access to content, it's a good thing because it gives us the first step into the market. And I think the film industry will pretty much follow the same path that music went through, where you've got few technology companies opening up the market for content to be accessed globally. So even niche markets can survive under those circumstances. But over time, extra competition comes in that reverses that process, i.e. democratizing that process. Because now when I look at a film as a financier, I want to know that youth exists that's going to subscribe or buy this film on demand. So from an immediate financial return point of view, it makes sense. But what happens in it, that certain stories then get watered down to accommodate the platform on which they're going to be put on, it can erode the cultural element of our stories. So it will depend really on how fast Africa platforms rise to effectively mimic what the Western platforms are doing and democratize that access to make sure that our films can maintain the authenticity of their stories but still have commercial viability. Because without that commercial viability, really, we're not sustainable.
And just to basically add on what you were saying, I was just at European Film Market in Berlinale in February, and I met with an African financier and an African studio head, and they were like, no tragedy, no sad Africa stories, which I can get with. They're like, it doesn't have to be drama and tragedy. Let's, everyday life. And the Europeans were like, oh, if it was like some hardship story, like it's in the war, or that was the one that they were looking for. So it's like two very different things of what they're asking for, what you can submit.
Well, indeed, those are really important points to make, which is market expectation varies across regions. And then I think it's really important for anyone who is African of the African diaspora, or anyone who's not at all but enjoys and wants to be part of, I would say, the African story, it's really important to acknowledge that there is the way that Africans see Africa, and then there's the way that people from outside see Africa. And by people outside, I also include people that look like us and have no familiarity with the African story as it is. And by Africa, I mean both of people from Africa and immigrants from Africa. I'm not including the wider diaspora because that's also another interesting narrative. And for sure, when it comes to festivals and financing, I have to say, for example, in my experience, I have been for over a decade in the market, and most of my success commercially has come from support from African markets. And by that I mean I am from a minority place because most people don't even know that countries that speak Portuguese as an official language exist in Africa, because interestingly enough, Portuguese is a minority language everywhere it is. We're a minority in Africa, we're a minority in Europe, because for example in Africa there's 5 countries, 70 or so million people across all five, whereas I think South Africa alone has almost that population, or the DRC, which neighbors Angola, has 100 million people. Therefore, we're not considered an interesting or viable market for international players. But most regional players find interest in our stories because there's something that they can relate to. When it comes to, yes, Brazil is huge, but again, they're a minority in their own region because everybody else speaks Spanish in Latin America. Portugal, only 10 million Portuguese speakers in Portugal. So the thing is, coming from that perspective, and one thing that really surprised me is it took many decades, but I saw works from my part of the world being embraced, and it was mainly by other Africans, and even from my work, I was very shocked and surprised to see content that I'm making crossing over to Congo or to Nigeria or to other parts of Africa and places where there's African immigration, whereas whenever I spoke to people from outside of that realm, whether it was an exec at a TV or film or platform, they would not get it. They would not know how to classify it or where to place my work, because in cases of, for example, people from the PALOP, from the Portuguese-speaking African countries, they always ask, especially in the US, so are you black? Are you Latino? It's like, where do we classify your work? And then you're also not Nigerian, or you're not Kenyan, or not South African, therefore we can place you there. But the interesting thing is, my work has been present in all those places and many others, because I think there is a kind of, I would say, rediscovery that's happening with the new generations of African consumers, where there's a higher interest of African consumers specifically to learn about ourselves and our neighbors. And I think that is generating a really good opportunity for local platforms right now. And that's also what woke up the appetite of the big companies, the big streamers especially, to enter the market in the way that they have. It's because they do have local competition. It's not necessarily going to be an easy way in, because obviously if we do look at, obviously, the Nollywood example, where it's a very robust audiovisual sector. There's a lot of output, there's a lot of consumption, not just there, but in a lot of different parts of the world. And they do have to compete with that. And I think that's very important to acknowledge as well, that our market and our players do also have that value. And they have been the ones keeping the market alive so far, even before the Netflix and Amazon, et cetera, came. I think they are obviously an added value because we're in a market economy, but we also have to acknowledge that, yes, it also is a very competitive marketplace in the African continent.
Awesome. I like to break these things up by going. Oh, did you want to say something? Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I thought I'd say something on that. These platforms, Netflix, Amazon, Apple, whatever, they've done some really, really good things, obviously, because vernacular is now being subtitled according to their standards, and spreading across borders, languages, traditions, which is very, very good for Africa. The demand has proliferated production, so that many more people are being trained to do productions now. Yeah, where we're going to lose out with them, for example, is that a few years ago the German government decided to sponsor some of us from Kenya to go to Germany and look at the film industry there, and we visited Babelsberg Studios, which are like the oldest large studios in the world. And they had their 100th anniversary in 2012 or something. 100 years, right? These are sound stages which can have 5 sets in each stage. They've got 23 of them. Huge. Out of those 23, 7 were booked for 2 years for a single German program called The Dark. Just one program. It was funded by Netflix. We're talking millions of dollars. And the reason for this was very simple, because Germany has several million subscribers to Netflix. And the German government told them, we cannot have, $100, $200 million every year going to the States. So we're just going to filter you out. No more Netflix. So Netflix came to Germany and said, you know what, let's make a deal. X percentage of all the money we get from your subscribers, we will use to produce content in Germany to feed Netflix. Fantastic. In my country, there are 12,000 subscribers on Netflix. yeah, as opposed to several million in Germany. Even if they take all the money and put it back into production, it's not even going to produce one program. Not forget a whole series, but even one program. And I think in Africa, that is where we are. Our people cannot afford. Also, we have Mnet. Mnet is really cheap, and most Kenyans, who have decent jobs have got Mnet. And those platforms is everywhere. But Mnet are also very clever. They have an academy in Nairobi where they train film people.
Really interesting. I was going to say, I like to break these things up so it's not just us talking to you guys by opening up to questions like halfway through. So does anybody have a question they'd like to ask? Anyone? Did you want to ask a question? Oh, okay. Okay, cool. We'll keep going. Okay. I'll give it to you.
I can introduce myself again. My name is Sydney. I'm an actor and documentary filmmaker and storyteller from Sweden. My question for you is, where do you see Africa as a brand in the future, and how powerful will it be in the future, for example, 10 years from now?
I think we need to go back to one of the first comments about maybe the first error we're making is to group Africa as one thing. I think beyond the authenticity of its people, the African brand has many segments to it. Like we're saying, a country will have, for example, South Africa has 11 official languages, which has its own traditions and cultures. So even South Africa in itself, we're struggling to have one brand that says, this is a South African film. But what the advent of technology is enabling us is that each and every individual culture has a chance of telling their own stories. And I think the brand of Africa has to be the drive towards telling our stories as authentically as possible in whatever language, and taking advantage of the dubbing processes and the subtitling to make sure that people who do not understand our languages can at least follow the authentic story. Because the story becomes more important in that global space, because then a person can follow your story. If you're saying it's an African story, but what makes it unique, uniquely South African? What makes it uniquely South African? What makes it uniquely Eastern Cape in South Africa? Xhosa, Zulu, whatever. So anyone from anywhere in the world who's curious about the stories from that particular tribe, whatever it is, should be able to enjoy that particular content. We have enough examples in our country, in music in particular. For example, Amapiano. You can say that's a South African music genre, for example. But even within South Africa, there are debates about, is it East Rand, Pretoria, or whatever.
I would say Durban, though.
So you see, then I think the technology enables us to retain our authenticity at that basic level without trying to fit in to a global standard that obviously doesn't work for us because we don't have the means of distribution.
Yeah.
And I wanted to add on to that too, because in South Sudan, Wi-Fi is a lot hit or miss, but everybody has a mobile phone. And so a lot of people consume entertainment from mobile phones. And so that's why you're not going to have like really a Netflix high subscriber or Amazon, because of just that. The infrastructure for Wi-Fi is not there unless you're like in the US Embassy or some sort of foreign compound. The elite people, if they have the money, they'll go to Kenya, they'll go to Dubai, they go out of town for their entertainment. But the general local population is streaming or Nollywood, a lot of videotapes, borrowing, and that kind of old-fashioned home viewing system. So I know there's been a lot of like interest from China and different mobile companies in getting their content into the hands there. And so it'd be kind of interesting to see like if there's some sort of like mobile content that these companies are like measuring their metrics for the US as how they get their subscribers and how they measure that.
Yeah, because I think about looking now from Western white European view because I'm adopted in Sweden, and that's what I mean with question where you see the African brand in the future is gonna be a brand that we're Africa, but we are so diverse. There's so many because it's very easy in Europe that they say like it's African. There's only one thing, and they don't have to put in how we say the knowledge and the hard work to actually that's from Nigeria. Okay, that's from that part of South Africa. It's actually more countries than South Africa and Nigeria making music. But a lot of people in Europe, they're like, but that's African music. Because it's easy to... I mean, look at the United States. Most of the people like to think Africa is one country. And that's what I mean. Is that the future of African brand that like we as a continent, but in our continent we have so much diversity? Is that the power you see in 5 to 10 years?
I think Africa already has a brand, and it's innovation. Because, for one, we are the youngest population in the world, and the renovation of generations in Africa is much quicker than every other continent, because you have a generation renewal, which is why you see so much innovation about every 3 years, whereas maybe in Europe, or it's going to be maybe 10 to 20 years, or in the US, 5 to 10 years. And the reason why I say this is people forget that, as to your point about mobile phones, mobile banking was invented in Africa. It was not invented in Europe, it wasn't invented in Asia, it wasn't invented in the US, it was in Kenya. And so without a Kenyan ingenuity, no one would be, banking through their mobile phone. And people forget about things such as that. Another thing is, for example, things such as YouTube monetization is not available in most African countries. It's only available in maybe, 10, I think, or so, out of the 54. However, people go viral without having internet access. How do you explain that capacity of most African people to go viral within our countries, starting within our neighborhoods and within our countries? And sometimes we have a lot of viral phenomena started by people who don't have internet access. Back in the day, I still remember the days where particularly Bluetooth was a big thing, where, for example, for music, a lot of music and short clips from Nollywood movies specifically. I remember this because I was in several African countries, and everyone would always have this, and no one really had internet access. One person maybe had it, but then everybody else got it. So I think innovation is, I would say, the African brand, because we always have to make do what we got. And we have to make it sexy, so.
Just to change the subject a little, we're at Cannes, so I guess it's a festival. What role do the festivals have in sort of the expansion of, if we want to expand, but like what role do they have in African cinema, and should they have?
I find that festivals are for us to see what's possible, and the scale, importantly. I think sometimes we operate in smaller markets and fail to think beyond our geographic borders. And I think the Africa Free Trade Agreement should be a leapfrogging mechanism for us to realize that we have a whole continent to exploit for our individual stories. And when you come to Cannes and places like this, where you can actually connect with similar thinkers in terms of where our stories should be going, how they should be shaped, and where they are going in the future, this kind of environment empowers you to say, go home and think about how big the world is and how accessible it actually is, so that you can actually bring the same force and power and aggregate your demand and buying power. Like you said, we've got the youthful population, but we not coordinating ourselves as a bloc to take advantage of it. It's executives who are looking from outside, who are saying, here's a last growth frontier. We need to go capture it before they wake up. So these kind of markets make you realize maybe we need to speed up our process.
And also, too, for being based in the United States, most of the times it's like no unsolicited information, no unsolicited calls. But I find that it's easier here to make connections because people are willing to give information, share information, connect here, which doesn't happen unless you're at a film market. And there's just more programs and more interest, I feel like, and knowledge, if you'd like to call it that, for Africans than as opposed to an AFM, American Film Market, which isn't really the spot to go to. So that's a really great thing. It's my first Cannes. I'm really excited. It's the first Sudanese film premiering here at Cannes, also the first film from Democratic Republic of Congo. So, and then there's at least like 10 other films also here. So it's really inspiring to see all of this as well.
I'll start back in Kenya. We used to have something called the Kenya International Film Festival, which I also used to chair. Yeah. And it was probably one of the most important festivals in Africa at the time. We were on the heels of Durban to knock it off the top. But then we had change of government, which is the curse of African politics, and the support just died away. But during that time, we used to get delegations and scouts from all over the world, who all of them actually have a budget, who all of them have a minimum requirement of African content. All of them have, some of them have got money to spend. And if you can get them into your country at a festival, and there are people in your country who are happy to pitch to these people, it is a really good thing to promote your local industry. In fact, the first time I came to Cannes also, it was, I was sponsored by the French. But festivals is where the people who actually, you only have certain types of people coming to these festivals. You have the people who want to buy content, you have the people who want to sell content, and you've got people who are looking for money to make content. There is nobody else. Yeah. So it's a very sort of captured market for what you really want to be doing in your career.
Well, I think just to add to what everyone said, there's also, I think, one thing that people often forget, which is the human element of finding like-minded people from different parts of the world. Because I think festivals and film markets of this nature are the only places really where you are going to find people who, just like you, have an interest in a specific field. They may come from somewhere different, they may look different to you, they may have a different culture, but you can find points in common. Whereas in other contexts, it's a little bit more, I would say, a little bit more difficult to have those conversations. And I think people are a bit more open and not as defensive to have important conversations. And especially now, I would say maybe now that we're post-COVID, there's the whole AI conversation, etc. We do have to come together and see where the industry is going. And the industry nowadays is truly global, thanks to technology. So there's very few places where we can come together to do things of that nature. And indeed, I hope that not only are we visiting festivals abroad, but there's more festivals in the African continent that we can all also go to and enjoy more and more. Because indeed, as to your point, continuity is a very big Achilles heel to, I think, most African content makers or creatives, because unfortunately, sometimes even if you have the capacity or you have international partners, people who are able to affect policy and to apply policy in a way that is that can hinder the processes and the professional output that is available in your market are, I would say, are something that we all have to consider whenever we are working in the African markets specifically.
All right, we're going to get kicked out in a second, so this will be my my last question to you all, I guess, is do you think as an assessment of where we are, do you think we're in a better place than where each of you started, and are you optimistic about the future?
Okay. Well, I think globally speaking, because I think sometimes we can look at it from a personal perspective, or in terms of a global output. For me, as a professional, as an African professional, because I chose to, although I grew up in the U.S., I chose to work and focus my work within the African continent. I think we are in a much better place simply for the fact that one thing that I'm very happy to know nowadays is that indeed there is this process where, for example, whereas maybe 15 or 20 years ago, most African people who I knew of my age group really wanted to explore other countries, whether it was for tourism or for content, there is more of a curiosity to discover what is more closely available to you, not only in your country, but in your region. And I think that also is kind of what fed the international trend of people from abroad, because I think the first line of defense for most African anything is the diaspora of African immigrants, because they're the ones usually hyping up our products wherever they are, and they tend to get interest from people surrounding their market. So I think that exchange has been very fruitful, and I think has been benefiting, I would say, the African markets, and I think that we need to find more ways to not only catalyze that, but to create a better ecosystem where that is possible.
I certainly think there's no better time than now, mainly because I think from a technical production point of view, our product is as good as any other product on screen, and I think that's a big win. Where we need to now, of course, there are differences according to which region you are going to, but certain countries are much more ahead than others, but I think the skills transfer is happening. But where I think we need to take advantage of the current situation is that we need to learn to monetize our content. We need to think the business, the sustainability, and of course our governments can play a huge role in incentivizing the cultural assets, because not all of them are commercial, but they have qualitative relevance. And we need to be able to distinguish between those projects, to say these ones can't be judged on commercial terms only. They are important cultural export. But these ones are more commercial, and we can actually get a financial return out of them. And take advantage of that, because I think if we miss this boat, I don't know when the cycle will turn again for us to be in this unique position.
Yeah, I definitely believe it's now the moment. I had gone to a conservatory for theater and film management in 1998 and dropped out of the program. And my first film I produced was in 2021 and did 16 international festivals last year, because people, I feel, have been more open. And our financier was an American in Boston who's never been to Africa, but was really excited and interested in the fact that for that amount of budget, you could actually create a quality feature. So I don't believe that would happen 5 years before or 10 years ago. So I definitely think that it's an open and a great moment.
Yeah, it's a fantastic time for film in Africa. We have got so many more people who are competent in so many different departments. We have got so many people writing scripts that, based on their lives and their tribes and their background. And, like a country like Kenya that has all the equipment that you need. We have everything from grips to dollies to silent generators to the people who know how to use them. All the good lights, technology with the new LED lights has lightened the packages that you need to go shooting with. And our people are being trained in these things every day. It was only like 20, 30 years ago when we would even do a small commercial and we would have to bring in a large part of the crew from other countries. Today, we need very, very few people from our side to do the shooting. So I think we are on the cusp of something great.
C'est bon. We're done. Thanks.
Much love is what we need upon us. Let them come together with the unity among us. Unity, it's a unity. This a good work.
Umoja ni nguvu, utengano udhaifu, tukisimama jitoe